Good morning, everybody. Welcome to McKelvin Library. Sí hablo español, pero mejor que enseño en inglés. It's a lot easier on a Saturday morning after coffee. So, as Dr. Giovanzetti said, I work here in McKelvin. We're going to talk about a variety of things today. You all are welcome to contribute, to jump in with questions. It's going to be, I hope that it will be fairly interactive. So you can continue trying to get on the Wi-Fi. I'm going to do a brief overview of what's going to happen today. I also have these slides online, and I put the short link right there so that you could follow along and access the resources that I'm going to talk about just by clicking in the presentation, okay? So this is the outline for my portion of today's great event. So we'll do a quick welcome introduction to who I am, what I do here, and what other librarians can do to help you. We're going to talk about a few scholarly databases that we have access to here, but that you can also access around the world. We're going to spend a fair amount of time looking at some primary sources and open educational resources that you should be able to use in your classrooms. And then we're going to do an activity at the end to evaluate some of these resources that you'll be able to take with you and access afterwards so that everybody can contribute to our understanding of what works best and what doesn't work so well. Okay? I have also gathered some further resources that didn't quite fit nicely into my library resource bucket, but I thought would be helpful for you all. So you'll be able to access those through these slides, and I'll make sure that the link is available after this slide as well. Okay? So hopefully everybody has some form of access to the internet at this point, and we'll go ahead and move on. So, first of all, I just want to tell you a little bit more about me and what I do as the librarian for the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. So my background is, I'm from the U.S., I grew up in Montana. I started studying Spanish when I was in junior high. I majored in Spanish and Italian in college. I studied abroad in Chile. I moved to D.C. and I met a lovely gentleman from El Salvador. So we've been married for about 12 years now, and I'm attempting to raise a couple of heritage-speaking children at my house. So that's kind of my personal background, but I've also been working here as a librarian for Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, and German since about 2010. So what does that mean, right? I actually didn't know before I came back to library school and met with my colleague Pat Heron, who's been a reference librarian for many years. And I do all kinds of things for the department. So I actually teach classes, so I will go to classes and show students how to use our library resources, how to come up with research topics, how to make sure that they're citing things correctly. We talk a lot about evaluating information to make sure that what they're using in their work is solid and scholarly. I also do one-on-one appointments with students, with graduate students, with faculty, undergrads, across the board, and I can sit down with them and make sure that they're on the right track if they're having a hard time. I also do all of our collection development for Spanish, so I take requests. I also do a lot of reading of book reviews, seeing what we need in our collection to support the research and teaching that's happening here at the university. And I collaborate with the department on events like this. We have workshops like this. We've also had a couple of great speaker events in recent months. So we're trying to do more stuff like that to get people into the library and talking to the great humans who work here as well. So that was a whirlwind explanation. Of course, there are many librarians like me at other universities, in our public libraries, and in schools as well. You can always seek out the people, because we really do have a good understanding of the resources. I have a background in the field, so I'm able to figure out what things are going to work better. And then, of course, we have our actual content that can be of help. And so I mean physical content and buildings and services, but I also mean virtual. So I wasn't aware of this, having gone to a private university, but most universities, especially in the DC area, you can walk in and use their resources as a member of the public. So University of Maryland is one of those. You can walk in, you can get a guest computer account, you can access any of our high-powered scholarly databases as a member of the community. I did a little bit of checking. You can do the same at Georgetown. You just have to show photo ID. George Mason is open to the public. You can walk in and use their materials. Even, PG Community College, if you're a county resident, you can go access those materials. So that's really important as we move towards more online resources, because publishers don't like to allow non-affiliates to access that material because they're afraid they will lose money, right? So we can't unfortunately provide access to non-affiliates from off campus. You have to be here in the building, but that is an option for sure, especially if one of those institutions or any of the others are close to you. We also have some fantastic public libraries in the DMV. So I live in Montgomery County. I'm most familiar with that system, but of course DC Public Libraries has great resources, as does Arlington and PG. So I just took a quick look at Montgomery County. They have a lot of great newspaper resources, including Spanish language newspapers. There's also access to article databases for that secondary scholarship and research. Montgomery County actually has Canopy for films, which is a fabulous resource that includes a lot of foreign films. We actually haven't managed to keep it here at the University of Maryland because we're so huge it would be just way too expensive. And you are limited to 10 films a month, I think, in Montgomery County. They also have Literature Resource Center, which is a great source for biographies and criticism. And they have a database called Informe, which is articles from popular Hispanic magazines. Okay, so that was just a quick search on the Montgomery County Library website. I'm sure that DC, Arlington, various other branches have similar options. So, of course, school media centers, those do vary by school. We are unfortunately not in a point where every single school has a fully staffed, fully resourced media center, even though that would be fabulous. But some do have physical Spanish collections, especially in Montgomery County where there's immersion programs. They have actual physical books. And they also have some county-wide online resources that are for public schools. So Montgomery County has Britannica Enciclopedia Moderna, which can be really handy. Okay, I'm talking a ton. I promise you will actually get to do things here shortly. So there's of course a number of virtual options that are free and open access. And so I'm going to talk about a few of the more powerful subscription databases, but I'm also going to spend a great deal of time talking about stuff that you can access from anywhere, no matter what affiliation you have. Okay? Does that sound good? Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll keep going then. Thank you. All right, so these are a few of the major resources that should be helpful for folks in your line of work. Okay, so the first are these subscription databases. So we have linguistics and language behavior abstracts, education source. Actually, let me talk through each of them a little bit, and we'll poke into them so you can see how they work. And you're welcome to start trying out some searches and finding things as well. So LLBA, Linguistics and Language Behavior Abstracts, is a great place to go for, like it says, any secondary research done about linguistics, about language behavior, and you can find a lot of things about, like, teaching heritage speakers, very specific focused topics, okay? Education source is much broader. It looks at education in general. But again, does have some really good stuff on heritage speakers and teaching Spanish overall. The MLA International Bibliography is probably where I spend the majority of my time, and then it's a fabulous resource for secondary sources about literature and culture in modern languages. And then the final one, and I am going to show you these so it's a little bit less obtuse, but Nexus Uni used to be LexisNexis, and that is a great newspaper database. So that one especially does have a lot of Spanish language content, but you have to search in Spanish to be able to find any of it. So it can be a little bit tricky. Okay, so we're going to quickly talk through a couple of these and how they work. And I'm going to get out of my presentation so I can, it's always a little bit risky using live stuff on the internet, but I'm sure it'll be fine, right? Everything will work great even though I'm standing in front of a large group of people. Okay, so LLBA, it takes us through the University of Maryland Library website because it is restricted to University of Maryland folks and people here, okay? So we click on the title. Some of you may have seen the screen before. ProQuest and EBSCO are two of the biggest database providers, and they run the majority of our resources at this point in time. So this is where we could try out a search. Something like Spanish and heritage. I usually try it as trial and error. If it doesn't work the first time, we'll tweak it a little bit, and I can show you what types of sources show up here. Okay. Let's see. So we get a lot of, they have nice little icons that help us learn what we're looking at. So the first one is actually a dissertation. We have a lot of scholarly journal articles included in here. If we take a look at one of these, the missing link in the Spanish heritage language debate. So you'll notice that even here in a subscription database, the full text isn't necessarily available right at that point. So in all of our sources, and you'll notice that at other institutions as well, there's typically some sort of little find button that will help you get to that full text. So keep an eye out for that, and then when you click on it, it takes you through and shows you the various places where you could get access to the actual text of that article. Okay? So there's also in most of our databases these linked subject headings, which will allow you to get to related material without redoing a search. So this works great for books as well, but you can use it to get closer to where you're going. So maybe you only want to focus on native language instruction, for example. If you click it, you now have 2,900 results that are about broader native language, not just focused in on Spanish, etc. Okay, so of course you can see what's going on up here. You're welcome to try out different searches, see what you can get. And then I just want to mention a couple of the others. Get out of that. So Education Source and MLA International Bibliography are both EBSCO databases. So they look exactly the same. So I'll just show one of those so you can see how it works. So again, we have this search screen. We could try, we know this entire database is about education and teaching, so you don't have to add any teaching language. So let's say something like Spanish. I'll try the same thing. Oh, you do have to spell things correctly in these sources, I will say. They're not nearly as good as Google at figuring out, and I accidentally hit enter, which is why that happened. What you mean? Okay, so University Spanish Heritage Language coursework. You might also want to think about what level you're working at, right? So you could put in something like, if we know we only want higher education, you could try one of these strings that it helps you come up with, right? So all of these ors mean that you're looking for synonyms. So this should cover a lot of different options, okay? So higher education or college or university. You never know how folks are going to talk about this in their research. Okay, meeting the needs of all heritage learners, emerging literacy in Spanish. All of these are academic. Understanding the heritage language student, proficiency in placement, right? So there's some great stuff that comes up here that's at that secondary research level, right? As opposed to the things you might use in your class. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of them do have the full text right here. You could, actually almost all of these do. So there's one you'd have to look up, but the rest of them you can just get straight to the full text. Okay? So the MLA, yes?
Maybe it's user error. But I'm clicking on the education source and I don't get to there, to the apps levels.
It asks for a login.
Okay. So if you click on this title right here,
Education source.
It asks for a login.
Yeah.
really?
It says directory ID and login.
Okay, so that's the way it knows that we are on campus in the building is based on IP address. So it could be if your computer has a different IP address, even though you're in the building and on our wireless, you won't have access to it because it thinks you're somewhere
The
else.
university issued.
So, yeah, the
computers are
computers
working.
that you gave us from the card, they have login. I think it's the first one that you have.
Fortunately, we have these two wonderful IT folks in the room, Cece and Dominic, who can come over to investigate. So that should not be happening if you're on a university-issued computer. It should be behaving just like what we just saw, where you get to this page and then you click right there. Okay? So if that does happen, it may be worth just grabbing one of our laptops to make sure that you can access these. The rest, of course, that we continue to talk about will be freely accessible regardless, but it might be helpful to try those out while you're here. That was a good learning experience for me. Thank you for helping me through that. Most of the teaching I do is with students and faculty at the University of Maryland, so identifying these slightly different and unexpected behaviors is really helpful for the next time we do one of these. Okay, so while people are working out access, I just want to point out the final subscription database that I wanted to show, which is Nexus Uni, just because of its great current newspaper content, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and open that one. Again, if you click this and you're not UMD or not on one of our IP addresses, it will ask you to log in, okay? So it's a terrifying interface and they change it on a regular basis. So I frequently log in and think, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to put stuff in this screen. Because I don't want law reviews, I don't want company info, I just want to get to newspaper articles. So they have made it fairly a little bit easier. You can totally skip this search box at the top and just go straight into this news. The key here is to make sure you're searching in Spanish, okay? So earlier this semester I was working with a class and we were looking for information about TPS. Turns out the official Spanish translation for that is Estatus de Protección Temporal. So of course TPS has been issued a number of times over the years, right? So you might want to narrow that down to find articles from the time period you're thinking about, right? So, you know, maybe right after Hurricane Mitch, we could say. So let's say like, it's gonna make me navigate.
Mitch 2002.
Okay, let's do 2002. So as you can see, you know, it's not the most intuitive interface, but once we get in there, you have to actually click a date. We'll just go back to January 1st. And then we'll say until like 2004, for example. And so you can find a way to limit by date in most databases, and that can really help you and your students get to quote unquote primary sources from that time period, right? So if you want newspaper articles about something that happened a while ago, you have to tell it to look in that time frame. Okay, so let's say till the end, so we'll do October, not 2018, but rather, let's say 2005. Okay. So we get 383 news articles. Some are coming out of Spain. So this is Colombians. So this is from 2004, talking about autodeportación. And all are in Spanish because we searched in Spanish, okay? And so some of these you're like, well, what newspaper was that published in? And it does include a lot of content from news wires. Does that mean anything to anybody? So coming from the AP or AP equivalent in various countries, so they put out articles and then newspapers pick them up. So these are news articles from that time frame. So let's say this is extending TPS for Nicaraguenses from 2002. FA News Services, you can see it's a short article, but it gives you the information so you could use it inside it, okay? So we've got Spanish language, primary source content from Nexus Uni, even though it takes a little bit of doing to get there. Okay, so I'm back on this page, and I see a number of you have joined me there. Excellent. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of these freely accessible sources, and we'll go ahead and present again. Okay, how many of you have heard of or used ERIC? A few. Okay, so ERIC is put out by the Department of Education. It's a great education research database. How about Google Scholar? Okay, so Google Scholar can be really handy. Occasionally it's a little bit frustrating because you find the perfect thing and then you can't get full text of it. So I want to encourage everybody to take advantage of whatever interlibrary loan service you have access to. So that might be through your local public library, but you can get articles, you can get books, you can get a number of different things through interlibrary loan. So of course we provide that for UMD folks, but even if you're not affiliated with the university, your public library will do ILL for you. Okay, so that can be a great way to get to some of that stuff that's really, that you're like, oh, that would be perfect, and then you can't get the full text. Okay, what about Redalic? Couple, all right, so this is a fabulous international, put out mostly by Spain, but also includes a lot of great content from the Caribbean and Latin America. And Cielo as well. So Cielo is primarily Latin America. I find the search on that one to be somewhat maddening, so it can be a little bit hard to find what you're getting at. So I'm just going to take you through these briefly, and you can again make sure that you're trying them out, seeing what you find, and then we can always you can access them again later as needed. All right. So let's take a look at ERIC first. Once we get into some of the free resources, right, they can be a little bit less flashy with a few less search options than the super expensive paid subscription databases, but they still do similar things, right? So we could try our Spanish heritage search again. We don't have to worry about teaching or anything of that because we're in an education database. And we do come up with a lot of peer-reviewed, so community service learning on heritage language learners' attitude towards their language and culture. It's from 2017. It's a very fresh article, and there is in fact a direct link to it here. If it will take us there. Okay, so some of these things you will still not have access to because they are provided through our library subscription, right? So it says right up here, access to University of Maryland libraries. It means that you could get it while you're here, you can download it, you can email yourself a copy of the PDF, whatever it might be, to make sure that you do have access to it in the future, okay? And you know, if you do have a chance to stop in one day, you could come with a list of all the sources that you want to get, download them all, and head off on your merry way. I can't imagine that that would be breaking any copyright laws, but just in case, maybe don't tell anybody that I told you that, right? We're always trying to make information more accessible, which is why the libraries are strong advocates for open access publication, okay? So ERIC is a really great alternative if you don't have access to ERIC Education Source. I just want to show you quickly a Google Scholar. So it's our very familiar Google interface, right? So here you have to be much more specific because you will get a million results, literally. So we might want to think about, we just saw that article about service, learning, heritage, speakers, and maybe Spanish. I'm searching in English. You will get more Spanish sources if you search in Spanish. Okay, a pilot study, so this is in Hispania from 2013. Critical pedagogy beyond the classroom walls. So we're seeing a lot of scholarly journal articles. We're also seeing some book chapters, okay? So that's something you'll find in here as well. We're seeing full books, some of which are available in Google Books. Others you'd have to get your hands on in a different way. I just wanted to give you a heads up that we didn't see them in our first results here, but you're also likely to run into more of those dissertations or theses, but also conference presentations. So occasionally you end up in Google Scholar with what looks like a PowerPoint, and that was in fact a conference presentation. It's considered scholarly because it was probably put out at a scholarly conference by a scholar, right? Okay, so yes.
There is one in Spanish, which is Google Académico.
Absolutely. So what I've noticed is because Google knows me and my habits, which is so creepy, if I go to Google Académico, it displays it in English. Okay, so actually this is the Portuguese version, right? Which is another option. But I will type in, so it should be scholar, so that's .pt, it should be .es. Oh, it did it for me today. Oh, it's because I'm not on my laptop, that's why. So again, Google Académico right here. So you can actually limit it to only Spanish that way. Excellent tip, okay. And that means you do have to search in Spanish. Okay, thank you for sharing. That's exactly the type of stuff. So if anybody has anything else that you want to throw out there, all of your colleagues will benefit from hearing about that stuff as well. Okay, so thank you. Yes?
I have a question. I tried to search on ERIC this past week, and when I tried to do it, it doesn't show me anything. I'm a teacher in Arlington, and it's under the library page. That means that I don't have the right to search, so I could go to the librarian and ask her in order to have access to?
Yeah, I'm not 100% familiar with how
ERIC works.
The subscription for ERIC would work. So this page, it's eric.gov. It's not giving us any special access based on University of Maryland. The thing is the access to the full text of the articles. So the way all of these databases started is back in the day, you would just take down the citation information, right? And you would have books of citations, and then you had to follow up on those to get the full text. So you can almost always get access to the citations, you just can't access the full text of the article, okay? So that's a bizarre behavior that I wouldn't expect to happen with ERIC, so I would definitely check with your librarian and see what might be happening there. Yes. Good question, thank you. Okay, so let's try out Redalyc. And Redalyc is definitely, you are more likely to find citations in here than full text, but you can definitely find your way to really solid research sources, okay? So it's a Spanish thing, Lengua de Herencia. We could try that. I always try to start with a broad search and then narrow down. Yeah, because we did get 73,000. Okay, so we do have some relevant results coming up, right? So, como lengua de, el programa de español como lengua de herencia, we might have to go back and add in like enseñanza. So, you all may have noticed I'm really sloppy with my language when I search, right? I don't bother with accents, I don't bother with capitals. It usually works the same either way. If it doesn't work, try putting an accent or an enye, right? So that's my strategy usually. Nope, okay. So both Relalic and Cielo tend to have this issue where you put in a search and you get a gajillion results that aren't as relevant as I would like them to be, right? So you do have to spend a little bit more time with these two sources kind of figuring out what search terms to use to get at the things that you want. So yes, it's a Spanish source, but of course we're seeing enseñanza del francés como lengua extranjera, so maybe we need to add in español. And it did find enseñanza even without my name, so español. Okay. So that's the process that I would recommend going through. You could also try putting some of these in quotes, which searches as a phrase, right? So if we put lengua de herencia, we could also try idioma de herencia and see how that goes. Okay, so that took us from 78,000 down to 8,000. So hopefully we're seeing more español como lengua de herencia en los Estados Unidos. Reto para su didáctica, right? So this one does actually include the full text right there. So this is a good process to go through to get to research materials that are freely accessible. Okay. So Cielo works very similarly to Relalic. You do have to do a little bit of tweaking with your search. And if you just go to Cielo, it takes you to the English version, but of course they also have the Spanish version and the Portuguese version. Okay, and those are accessible up here. So it gives you one big search box, you kind of have to tweak. Theoretically, the searches work in all three languages, but you can always try whatever language the material that you're searching for is in, typically. Okay? All right, so I have continued to talk for a long time. So hopefully everybody has been able to try these out a little bit, see how they work, and then you'll of course have access to them while you're here, and have the list available afterwards should you need to, show up and try out a whole bunch of stuff one day. Okay? All right, so let's move on to talk a little bit about primary sources. So when I say primary sources, what does that mean to you all?
Text that you're studying or reading or working on.
Okay, so the text that you're studying, reading, or working on, okay? So if you're talking about literature, for example, it might be the poem or the actual novel, a film, something like that. Earlier I mentioned limiting by date. We also often think of primary sources as being something that came out at the same time as the thing that you're studying happened. So that could be first-person accounts. Now we're seeing things like interviews on YouTube. For historical events, it might be diaries or letters. So that's another way that people think about primary sources. And this definitely varies a great deal by discipline, right? So for today's purpose, we're going to talk a lot about texts and multimedia and resources, films that you can use in your classes as Spanish language original material for students to work with, okay? So that's the idea. So first I'm going to talk about a couple of full text collections. So these are actual collections of literature that has either been scanned or somehow moved into the internet. These two are both most useful for older literature, stuff before the copyright law takes over in 1923. So as long as you're studying people that wrote before 1923, you're totally fine. All of your things would be on the internet. You don't have to worry about it. The problem is that many of you are not studying authors that wrote before 1923, which is when somebody publishes stuff in Latin America, they cut maybe 500 copies. If your library didn't buy it when it came out, you may just not be able to get a copy of it. So these are very real challenges for folks who are in the US who are teaching Spanish and Spanish literature, okay? All right, so I just want to make sure that I don't forget to say anything, so I'm going to get back to my notes here real quick. Okay, this is the problem with operating two computers at the same time. Okay, so HathiTrust, have any of you used HathiTrust before? Okay, so this is a university library collaboration with the Google Book Project. And so back before they got sued, Google Books was going through huge university libraries and scanning everything. They went to Michigan, they went to Harvard, they went to Indiana, places with the largest collections in the US, and they just pulled every single book off the shelf and they scanned it. They decided that they would do that first and then work out the whole copyright landscape later, which ended up not working out for them. Which means the only stuff that's actually available full text in HathiTrust is before 1923. But, for example, we could think about some authors from that time period, so even Rubén Darío, right, who wrote earlier on. We could do a search for him. And this is totally open to anyone. For full view, okay, so this is a very excellent teaching moment for myself, right? In that I just typed in Rubén Darío, so I'm getting a ton of results about him, when really I want literature that he wrote, okay? So I'm gonna do an advanced search. And I actually, okay, so this is author. We want anything where he is the author, not where he is a subject. So if we change that search, it changes it down. We have 109 different things that we have full view of. So if we want to look, for example, at, Azul, published in 1888, that means we get the full view. So it has this really nice reading interface where it actually pulls up the scanned book, right? So it's not like a typed in version, it's the actual scanned content, okay? So I use this a lot with students because they tend to end up on pages like Poemas del Alma, where anybody can upload their own poem, for example, or it's just typed in, right? And you have no way of knowing, especially with poetry, if the stanzas are correctly entered, if there's any spacing that the author originally intended to be a certain way. So you can get back to some first edition works this way in HathiTrust and have access to it. You can, unfortunately, you can't download the whole book unless you are a HathiTrust partner, but you can download pages and sections. Okay, so you could get a particular poem or a particular story, anything like that, all right? So I highly recommend HathiTrust for that before 1923 original Spanish literature, all right? It's the best place to go. All right, so what about Biblioteca Virtual Miguel de Cervantes? Okay, so I'm seeing more nods here. So there's a great deal of virtual literature available here. One of my favorite things, of course you can enter a search right up here. You could do búsqueda avanzada to type in that author name and narrow it down a little bit. But if you navigate through the site, for example, if you go to Literatura, they actually have these really nice author and theme pages. So if you check out the author pages, Juan Ramon Jimenez is of course very famous on our campus. We have buildings named after him. Just one building. More than one would probably be pretty impressive. And so it has a really nice page with biographies, chronologia, lists of his works, and then secondary sources as well. And it takes you to further resources. So they have these for a number of primarily Spanish authors, but these author pages are really great and really well done for my experience. And the same goes for their theme pages. Right. Libros de caballerías. Cantar de mi Cid, del soneto, Biblioteca Africana. So it's a really great resource to not just get to the full text of literature, but actually some of that supporting material as well. Okay. So now we get into some of the, I guess they're tailor-made open educational resources sites. Does open educational resource, OER, mean anything to you folks? I'm seeing some nods. So it's the idea that, well, I think at the base of it at some point was the fact that, especially in college, textbooks are ridiculously expensive, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And that really limits some students' ability to even attend college, regardless of whether they can pay the tuition or not. And to actually participate in the classes, because many people will just not buy the textbook because they can't afford it, and then stay in the class and then get a bad grade because they didn't have the textbook. So that has led to a movement to try to make materials for courses available for free or at a much more reasonable cost. And it's referred to as open educational resources. And so there's a number of different directories of OER materials that have popped up in fairly recent years. And so it's much broader than just a textbook or just literature, but there are syllabi included, there are activities, there are quizzes, there are videos, multimedia, all kinds of different resources that you could use in your class and plug in to your workflow, okay? So I'm going to show a couple. Has anybody heard of any of these before? So we've got Open Textbook Library, Merlot. Yeah, Merlot is a big one. So is OER Commons, and then OpenStax. CNX is the, it's like the user-generated side of OpenStax, because if you just go to OpenStax, there's no Spanish anything, right? They have one humanities textbook in the entire website, which is for history. Which you may also run into a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to point out a couple of key things about a few of these. And again, I encourage you all to follow along with me, okay? So Open Textbook Library is out of the University of Minnesota. It has this nice search box right here at the top, or you can browse by subject. So I'm going to go ahead and search for Spanish literature, because that's kind of what we're looking for. Okay, and their search is also a little bit questionable. Not looking for any British literature, but thank you. Okay. So we do have some world literature, of course, all of that is in English. There we go. All right, so we have this Leyendas y Arquetipos de Romanticismo Español. I'm going to open this one. So you can see that this is put out by a professor at Portland State University. It's from 2017. You can get a full PDF of this book right here, and you can see all of the different things that are included over here on the right. So these are actual texts of literature, works of literature. So the Montenerio is included, and it's designed to sort of capture that particular time period, right? But you'll also see that there are reviews. So you can get a little better idea of how people have used this, if it's legit, if it's something you want to use in your classroom before you have to spend a lot of time going through it, right? Because that's one of the benefits of using a fancy corporate textbook is they have editors, they have whole teams, it shows up on your desk, you can be like, oh, this is great, it's a little bit different from last year, we'll go ahead and use that. And it doesn't always seem obvious that it's going to cost $600 or whatever it might be. Okay, so there's one example. in the open textbook library. There's another really good one, which is the Antología Abierta de Literatura Hispana, which it covers a lot broader time period. It's out of the University of Oklahoma, and this is a really unique project in that she included her students in the creation of this anthology. And there's actually a website that you could go to in case you wanted to develop a similar resource with your students. So the students have put together introductory notes and also footnotes to help explain some of the terms in the book. So you can again get a PDF, you could get this EPUB, which you could read on an e-reader, or you can read it online. Okay? So these are two great sources in open textbook library. There really are only 2 Spanish books in this entire thing now. So that is something that you'll run into. All right, so let's talk for a little bit about Merlot, which does have much broader coverage for Spanish. And I actually had the best look getting to things when I browse through Merlot. Typically I'm a searcher, but this site in particular does well with browsing. So I'm going to try browsing by discipline. Start with humanities. We get 10,000 results. You can go ahead and filter over here on the left. I'm going to go into world languages first. And then you can get into actual Spanish particular sources, okay? So it's humanities, world languages, Spanish. And so here, this is very much getting at that actual course materials and materials in general. So you have proficiency exercises. So these are actually video clips of native Spanish speakers. There's, which other one that I think is really cool? So there's actual exercises, right? So conjuguemos, self-grading, self-timed, conjugating, and vocabulary building. There are some I don't know, Rosetta Stone equivalents in here as well, which may be less helpful. But this Taller Hispano is a great tool, multimedia workshops. So we're just scrolling through the first few out of 485 different things in the Spanish world language section, okay? So these are all open, they're all free to use and incorporate them in your courses. They also include reviews. You can see when they've last been updated, which can be really helpful information. So even though this was created in 2001, it was updated on March 27th, 2019, so it's still up to date.
What was your keyword?
So I actually didn't search here. So this one, the easiest way is to navigate through.
Okay.
So if you go to first to humanities, then world languages, and then Spanish. Because otherwise you get all kinds, it's just too big to search effectively, I found. So, okay. All right, so Merlot is great. OER Commons works very similarly. It has the same type of stuff. There may be some overlap. You may be seeing a few things in both places. So I'm not going to spend too much time in OER Commons. But I did want to make sure everybody was aware of this directory of open access books. Sorry. So there are more and more people who are starting to get their work out there open access, right? And open access means that it is available to people without being behind a paywall at a university or at a company or something like that, right? It's a legal way to get stuff as opposed to say like Sci-Hub where copyrighted material is being posted illegally. So it's a growing initiative. So this is open access books. This is mostly going to be research topics that are published about your work as opposed to the original primary source stuff that we were talking about. So language teaching, how about that? No, matches. All right, I was too specific. Okay. Yeah, so probably to be a little bit more broad. Okay, so we get a little bit more. So these are, they're not going to, because there's not a huge corpus here, it's going to be harder to find the exact thing that you're looking for, but depending on what you're working on, it can be a really great resource. Okay, so directory open access books. Okay. So OER Commons and OpenStack CNX are other really great options that are similar to Merlot. So we got about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we start compiling some of your experiences using these things. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about our activity, all right? So I'm hoping that everybody can try out the resources that we've discussed so far. If you know of others, you can absolutely use those instead. And I want to make sure everybody thinks about evaluating these sources. Because it is, in many cases, it's still user-generated content that is put up on the internet, right? So you do want to make sure that you understand where it's coming from, how it got to be online, if it's gone through some sort of editing or publishing process before that point, and if you can actually get access to it and download it, all right? So these are the types of questions that you could ask yourself as you're thinking about these resources. I'll leave this slide up, and then I've created a Padlet, which is basically an online sticky note board where you can go to that link that's included in the slides and you can add comments to each of these sources, all right? So you can add new ones if you click on this little button or double click, and it's pretty straightforward to say like Biblioteca Virtual Miguel de Cervantes has great author and theme pages. Also, feel free to write in English or Spanish, whatever works. And these will stay accessible to you after today, and we'll share on the website as well. Okay, so I've seeded them with a few comments. For example, Hadi Trust is free scan books from before 1923, lots of original Spanish literature. You can move this around to see all of them. So I have a section about Google Scholar, and hopefully everybody can start contributing a few things that you've found useful, and that way we'll have a lot to walk away with today.